The rise and fall of Bethlehem Steel, the company that built America. 5,000 people used to work here. Today, there's nobody left. The blast furnaces stand silent. The forges are cold. Rust eats through the steel that once built America's skyline. This is Bethlehem Steel, the company that raised the Golden Gate Bridge, that forged the beams for the Chrysler Building, that built more warships than any other company in American history. Beautiful. Yes, but that's just the surface. Behind the glory lies a darker story of missed opportunities, arrogance, and a slow-motion collapse that destroyed not just a company, but an entire city's way of life. Can industrial might make you immortal if you refuse to change? And the real question, why did an entire city collapse? If you enjoy deep investigations into American industrial history and the companies that shaped our nation, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which shuttered factories we should explore next. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. Part 1. Fire and Vision, 1857 to 1904, the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania. A group of railroad men and investors faced a problem. The Lehigh Valley Railroad needed iron rails to expand across the mountains, but suppliers were distant, unreliable, and expensive. The solution? Build their own iron works. They founded the Saucona Iron Company along the Lehigh River in what would become Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. The location was strategic at the junction of two major railroads, with coal and iron ore accessible by water and rail. Within 4 years, by 1861, the company changed its name to Bethlehem Iron Company and began production. The timing was perfect. The Civil War created voracious demand for iron rails, cannons, and armor plate. The company hired John Fritz, an engineering genius who revolutionized iron production with his three-high rail mill, a breakthrough that allowed rails to be rolled more efficiently than ever before. By the 1870s, iron was giving way to steel. Fritz traveled to England to study Henry Bessemer's converter, which made mass production of steel possible. In 1873, Bethlehem Iron began making steel. The pivot was economic necessity. Iron rails failed under heavy traffic. Steel rails lasted longer, performed better, and commanded higher prices. The company thrived. By 1882, Bethlehem secured all government contracts for naval armor plate, beating every competitor. When the Spanish-American War ended in victory for the U.S. fleet in 1898, Bethlehem's business exploded. The company began rebuilding foreign navies and producing the highest quality steel in America. Numbers tell part of the story. Production climbed year after year. Profits multiplied. The workforce grew from hundreds to thousands. But the company was still regional, still limited in scope. It needed vision. It needed transformation. In 1904, it found both. Charles M. Schwab arrived in Bethlehem that year. Schwab was already a legend, a self-made man who had risen from Carnegie Steel's shop floors to become the first president of U.S. Steel at age 39. But he had left U.S. Steel after conflicts with financiers who, he felt, stifled his entrepreneurial spirit. Schwab saw something different in Bethlehem. Not just an iron and steel works, but the foundation for an empire. In December 1904, he incorporated Bethlehem Steel Corporation. The new company absorbed Bethlehem Iron, Cuban iron ore mines, and shipyards in California and Delaware. Schwab became president and chairman. His vision was audacious: build the second-largest steel producer in America. Not through consolidation alone, but through innovation, vertical integration, and relentless expansion. Schwab made two critical moves immediately. First, he hired Eugene G. Grace, a 28-year-old electrical engineer from Lehigh University. Grace had started as a crane operator, but displayed extraordinary technical talent and management skill. Schwab gave him special projects, sent him to Cuba to solve problems at the mines, and watched him succeed at every turn. Together, Schwab and Grace became the team that would build Bethlehem into an industrial titan. Schwab provided vision, salesmanship, and capital. Grace provided technical mastery, operational discipline, and tireless execution. Their first breakthrough came in 1907. Bethlehem Steel adopted Henry Gray's revolutionary mill rolling process, becoming the first American company to do so. This process produced H-section steel beams, wider, lighter, and cheaper than traditional beams. These wide-flange I-beams would change construction forever. By 1908, Bethlehem Steel began mass-producing the H-beam. In Schwab's most famous comment, he told his secretary, "I've gambled everything on this. If we fail, we'll fail big." They didn't fail. The H-beam revolutionized building construction. Suddenly, skyscrapers could rise taller. Bridges could span farther. The age of vertical cities became possible. Bethlehem Steel transformed from a regional producer into an essential supplier for America's explosive urban growth. The company expanded aggressively. Schwab acquired coal holdings across the Northeast to secure fuel. He bought the Lackawanna Steel Company, gaining massive production capacity. He purchased the Four Rivers Shipbuilding Company, making Bethlehem a major shipbuilder. He secured iron mines in Cuba to control raw materials. By 1913, Grace became president at age 37. Schwab remained chairman. Their partnership defined the company for the next quarter-century. Vertical integration was complete. Bethlehem Steel controlled everything from iron ore mines to finished products. The company could produce steel cheaper, faster, and more reliably than most competitors. Scale brought power. Power brought profits. Profits fueled more expansion. The question no one asked: what happens when the world changes? Part 2. The Arsenal of Democracy. 1914 to 1945. World War I erupted in Europe. American companies rushed to supply the Allies, Britain, France, and Russia, with munitions, armor plate, and warships. Bethlehem Steel seized the opportunity. Under Schwab's leadership, Bethlehem became the largest single supplier of munitions to the Allied powers. The company produced more artillery shells, more naval guns, and more armor plate than any other source. A single order from Britain totaled $135 million, the largest contract in company history to that point. The profits were staggering. Before the war, Bethlehem's annual revenues hovered around $60 million. By 1916, revenues soared past $200 million. The company expanded shipyards, built new steel mills, and hired thousands of workers. The war ended in 1918, but Bethlehem Steel kept growing. The 1920s brought a construction boom. American cities reached for the sky. New York led the charge, and Bethlehem Steel provided the skeleton. Walk down Manhattan in the 1920s, and you saw Bethlehem Steel rising everywhere. The company's chief engineer, Carson F. Diefenderfer, boasted that Bethlehem Steel owned New York. The company provided steel for 80% of New York's skyline: the Woolworth Building, the Bank of Manhattan Tower, the Chrysler Building, the Empire State Building. Beyond New York, Bethlehem Steel left its mark across America. The Cathedral of Learning at the University of Pittsburgh, 42 stories of academic Gothic, stood on Bethlehem beams. The Ben Franklin Bridge in Philadelphia, the George Washington Bridge in New York, massive structures that defined American ambition. In 1929, Grace received a bonus of $1.6 million, roughly $28 million in today's dollars. The bonus structure at Bethlehem was legendary. Executives earned percentages of company profits. When profits soared, so did executive pay. Critics called it excessive. Shareholders called it theft. In 1931, a group of stockholders sued, demanding that $36 million in bonuses paid since 1911 be returned. The suit was settled with changes to the program, but no funds were returned. Then came October 1929. The stock market crashed. The Great Depression began. Construction halted. Steel demand plummeted. Bethlehem Steel's profits collapsed. Grace responded with discipline. He cut costs, trimmed staff, and mothballed furnaces. The company survived, though profits turned to losses in some years. Grace believed the economy would recover. He believed steel demand would return. He refused to panic. He was right, but recovery came from an unexpected source. September 1939. World War II began in Europe. According to legend, Grace was golfing at Saucon Valley Country Club when a caddy ran up and announced the war's start. Grace turned to his golfing partners, all company vice presidents, and said, "Gentlemen, we're going to make a lot of money. It was not a joke. It was prophecy. When the United States entered the war in December 1941, Grace geared Bethlehem Steel's entire capacity toward war production. Furnaces, shops, and mills ran 24 hours a day. Workers operated in round-the-clock shifts. Grace pushed production to 101% of normal capacity, squeezing every ton of output possible. Between 1941 and 1945, Bethlehem Steel produced more than 73 million tons of steel. The company built over 1,100 ships, destroyers, aircraft carriers, cruisers, cargo vessels. In 1943 alone, Bethlehem launched 380 ships. The company provided nearly one-third of all armor plate and gun forgings used by the United States military. Bethlehem Steel was the arsenal of democracy. Without it, Allied victory would have been impossible. At war's end in 1945, Bethlehem Steel stood at the pinnacle of industrial power. Most of the world's steel capacity lay in ruins: Germany, Japan, Britain, France. American steel faced no competition. Bethlehem was the second-largest producer in the nation and among the largest in the world. Employment peaked at over 300,000 workers globally. The Bethlehem plant alone employed 31,000 people. Grace looked at the future and saw unlimited demand. Europe and Asia would need to rebuild. America's suburbs would expand. Highways, bridges, buildings, all would require steel. Bethlehem Steel seemed invincible. Beneath the triumph, cracks were forming. Invisible at first, but growing. Part 3. The Seeds of Destruction, 1946 to 1977. The post-war years looked golden. Demand for steel remained high. Profits rolled in. Executives enjoyed lavish compensation. By 1958, 6 of the 10 highest-paid executives in America worked for Bethlehem Steel. But the world was changing in ways Bethlehem Steel refused to see. First, labor relations hardened. The United Steelworkers of America, formed during the war, pushed aggressively for higher wages and better benefits. Between 1946 and 1959, the union struck 5 times. Each strike shut down the industry. Each settlement raised wages and expanded benefits. Bethlehem Steel, like other major producers, found it easier to grant wage increases than to fight. The steel industry operated as an oligopoly, a market with few producers. When one company raised prices to cover higher labor costs, others followed. Customers had limited alternatives. The cycle continued. Strike, wage increase, price increase, repeat. Grace and the company's executives opposed unions fiercely. Grace had supported union busting in the 1910s and led Little Steel opposition to New Deal labor reforms in the 1930s. He famously told Labor Secretary Francis Perkins of his sacred policy never to recognize organized labor. Only the threat of losing government defense contracts forced him to accept unions in 1941. The antagonism never faded. Labor and management viewed each other with suspicion and hostility. Then came 1959. The steel strike of that year lasted 116 days, the longest work stoppage in American steel history to that point. Over 500,000 steelworkers walked off the job. Management wanted changes to work rules, arguing that contract provisions protected featherbedding and reduced competitiveness. The union refused. President Eisenhower invoked the Taft-Hartley Act on the 116th day, forcing workers back under an injunction. A contract was eventually negotiated. The union retained restrictive work rules and won modest wage increases. But the real damage was invisible. American manufacturers, desperate for steel during the strike, turned to foreign suppliers. They discovered that Japanese and European steel was cheaper and often of higher quality than American steel. Ships lined up for miles outside Philadelphia, bringing in foreign steel. In 1958, steel imports totaled 2 million tons. In 1959, imports jumped to 5 million tons. They would never return to 1958 levels. Within 6 years, imports doubled again. Some customers never came back to domestic steel. Others reduced their purchases permanently. The 1959 strike opened the door. Foreign competition walked through. Second, technology moved forward, and Bethlehem Steel stood still. After World War II, European and Japanese steel producers rebuilt their industries from scratch. They adopted new technologies, basic oxygen furnaces, which produced steel in 1 hour instead of 6. Continuous casting, which shaped molten steel directly into slabs, eliminating expensive rolling mills. Bethlehem Steel clung to open hearth furnaces, technology dating to the 19th century. Continuous casting arrived late. The company's culture emphasized conformity over innovation. Executives who questioned the old ways were sidelined. The board of directors, composed entirely of company insiders until 1965, reinforced groupthink. Eugene Grace, who had driven the company to greatness, became an obstacle. He refused to groom a successor. He isolated the company from new ideas. He trained generations of executives that there was only one way to make steel, Bethlehem Steel's way, with massive plants, huge workforces, and vertical integration. When Grace finally retired in 1957, he left no clear successor and a culture resistant to change. Third, competition emerged domestically. Mini-mills appeared in the 1960s and 1970s, small, efficient steel plants that melted scrap metal and produced finished products cheaply. Companies like Nucor pioneered electric arc furnaces and continuous casting. They operated with lower labor costs, newer equipment, and flexible production. Bethlehem Steel dismissed mini-mills as incapable of matching its quality. The company was wrong. By the 1980s, mini-mills were taking market share in basic steel products. By the 1990s, they were producing high-quality steel for demanding applications. Fourth, demand patterns shifted. Plastics and aluminum replaced steel in many applications. Cars became lighter. Construction methods evolved. The assumption that steel demand would always grow proved false. Bethlehem Steel responded by doubling down on the old model. In the 1970s, the company invested billions in expanding and upgrading plants. But the upgrades were insufficient and came too late. New capacity came online just as demand softened. September 30th, 1977. Black Friday. Bethlehem Steel laid off 2,500 white-collar workers across the company. That year, the company lost $448 million, its first losing year since 1933. Former employee Laron Dracer asked bitterly, "Who in the hell needed 12 vice presidents making $500,000 a year?" The decline accelerated. Plant closures followed. The Bethlehem plant, the flagship facility along the Lehigh River, cut workers steadily. Entire departments vanished. The massive infrastructure, blast furnaces stretching a quarter-mile, buildings the size of city blocks, began to empty. The question became not whether Bethlehem Steel would survive, but how long the death would take. Part 4. The Collapse, 1978 to 2003. The 1980s were brutal. Foreign competition intensified. Cheap steel from Japan, South Korea, and China flooded American markets. Bethlehem Steel filed trade complaints, sought tariffs, and lobbied Washington for protection. Some relief came, but not enough. At the same time, legacy costs multiplied. Bethlehem Steel had made generous pension and healthcare promises during the boom years. As the workforce shrank, the ratio of retirees to active workers worsened. Every plant closure added retirees entitled to benefits, but removed workers funding those benefits. A vicious cycle. The company's underfunded pension obligations, dating to Eugene Grace's era, became crushing. Healthcare costs exploded. By the 1990s, Bethlehem Steel spent more on retiree benefits than on raw materials. Management tried everything. They modernized some facilities, installing continuous casters in the 1980s. They cut costs wherever possible. They closed unprofitable plants. The Lackawanna plant closed. The Johnstown plant closed. The flagship Bethlehem plant ceased production on November 18, 1995, the last day the blast furnaces burned. Jerry Green, a union leader and 27-year employee, said, "I never would have believed it in my wildest dreams. I thought Bethlehem was a giant and steel was king." But the king was dead. After the Bethlehem plant closed, the company limped on, operating facilities elsewhere. But the core was gone. The company that had employed 31,000 workers in Bethlehem alone now employed a fraction of that across all locations. In 1998, Bethlehem Steel sold its profitable stake in the former Bethlehem facilities to a developer. The sale provided temporary cash, but acknowledged defeat. October 15, 2001, Bethlehem Steel filed for bankruptcy protection. The company cited unfairly traded steel imports and the economic slowdown following the September 11 terrorist attacks as contributing factors. The bankruptcy proceedings revealed the depth of the disaster. Assets were insufficient to cover pension and health care obligations for 95,000 retirees and dependents. The Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, a federal agency, took over the pensions, but at reduced benefit levels. Many retirees lost health care coverage entirely. In 2003, International Steel Group purchased Bethlehem Steel's remaining assets for $1.5 billion. The Bethlehem Steel Corporation was dissolved. 146 years of industrial history ended. Bethlehem spokeswoman Bet Kovac confirmed the end. It's a sad, painful event. Is this how people who worked for Bethlehem Steel envisioned it would end? No, it's not. Part 5. The Empty City, 2003 present. Walk through the former Bethlehem Steel site today. The blast furnaces still stand, preserved as industrial monuments. They tower over the south side of Bethlehem. 5 massive structures reaching more than 230 feet into the air, stretching nearly a quarter mile along the Lehigh River. But they are silent. No fire, no heat, no molten steel pouring from crucibles. The buildings are empty. The railroad tracks are rusted. The machinery is still. 5,000 people used to work here. Today, there's nobody left. The site has been partially redeveloped. A casino opened in 2009 on part of the land. ArtsQuest, a nonprofit arts organization, operates Steel Stacks, a 10-acre campus for education and entertainment built around the preserved blast furnaces. The National Museum of Industrial History occupies former company buildings. Tourism replaced industry. Culture replaced production. It's something. It's not enough. The city of Bethlehem suffered. For a century, Bethlehem Steel was the economic engine. Wages supported families, funded schools, built churches, and sustained small businesses. When the steel left, prosperity left. Unemployment spiked. Property values crashed. The tax base collapsed. Bethlehem struggled for years to reinvent itself. The human cost is harder to measure. Families that worked at the steel for 3 generations saw their way of life evaporate. Workers who expected pensions watched benefits shrink or vanish. Healthcare coverage disappeared. Skilled tradespeople, electricians, machinists, welders, found their expertise suddenly worthless. Some workers relocated. Some retrained. Many simply retired early or gave up. The story of Bethlehem Steel is often told as a victim narrative, killed by unfair foreign competition and union greed. That version is incomplete. Yes, foreign competition hurt. Steel imports from countries with lower wages and newer facilities undercut American prices. Trade policy failed to protect domestic producers adequately. Yes, union demand strained the company. The 1959 strike and subsequent contracts raised labor costs beyond competitive levels. Restrictive work rules prevented productivity improvements. But those factors were not fatal by themselves. Bethlehem Steel killed itself through arrogance, complacency, and refusal to change. The company clung to outdated technology when competitors modernized. It rejected mini-mills as threats rather than studying their advantages. It maintained a corporate culture that punished innovation and rewarded conformity. Most damningly, Bethlehem Steel never groomed leadership capable of navigating change. Eugene Grace's 40-year reign created an insular management class trained to believe Bethlehem's way was the only way. When Grace retired, no visionary replaced him. Bureaucrats managed decline. Compare Bethlehem Steel to Nucor, the mini-mill pioneer. Nucor adopted new technologies aggressively. It operated non-union plants with flexible work rules. It located facilities strategically near customers and scrap sources. It kept overhead low and responded quickly to market shifts. Nucor survived. Nucor thrived. Today, Nucor is one of the largest steel producers in America. Its market capitalization exceeds what Bethlehem Steel was worth at its peak. The difference was not luck. It was leadership and willingness to adapt. Epilogue, lessons from the ruins. Stand at the base of Bethlehem Steel's blast furnaces today and look up. The sheer scale is overwhelming, testimony to industrial ambition, engineering genius, and human labor. But the silence is overwhelming too. The absence of sound, no roar of furnaces, no clang of metal, no shouts of workers, tells a story as powerful as any success. Bethlehem Steel built America. The Golden Gate Bridge, the Chrysler Building, the George Washington Bridge, ships that won 2 world wars, infrastructure that enabled a superpower. Then Bethlehem Steel died. Not suddenly, not from a single cause, but from 1,000 failures, each small, each avoidable, each ignored until the aggregate weight became unbearable. Who paid for Bethlehem Steel? Workers who gave their labor, investors who lost their capital, retirees who forfeited promised benefits, a city that lost its identity. Why did an entire city collapse? Because it placed all its faith in a single industry. Because that industry believed itself invincible. Because arrogance replaced vigilance. The lesson is stark. Industrial might is not permanent. Market dominance is not guaranteed. Success creates the conditions for failure if it breeds complacency. Bethlehem Steel refused to change, so change destroyed it. If you enjoyed this deep investigation into American industrial history, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support makes these detailed stories possible. Tell me in the comments which shuttered factories should we explore next. The Packard Automotive Plant in Detroit, the Youngstown Steel Mills, the textile mills of New England, or perhaps something unexpected. A forgotten factory with a story waiting to be told. These places aren't just ruins. They're warnings. Built by visionaries, destroyed by their successors' blindness, paid for with real costs, human and financial, and preserved now only in memory and rust. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next investigation.